I would put metrics are a signal for you to be able to take action. So what you do is, okay, my cycle time is, let's say, 5 days, and my change failure rate is, let's say, 40%. What you do is, okay, let's make sure that the change failure rate decreases all the way to 15%. And I have a goal of decreasing my cycle time to 3 days. Okay, if you have this goal, what do I do now? You start to brainstorm. You look into the whole development process. You realize that, oh, we have like a QA team, and but they're taking so much time. So if I remove the QA team, I will ensure that cycle time will go to 3 days. But what will happen to change failure rate? Will it actually be worse or better? Okay, let's say we did that. We removed QA from that. Then we need to take another action to make sure the quality actually matches that. We add more review processes. We experiment with test coverage. We experiment with other leading metrics, which might impact to my goal, which is we will have less rollbacks or hot fixes during this period of time. You identify the problem first. You have a goal for it. You dive deep, figure out which parts can actually affect. You'll probably figure out more than 10 leading metrics which will actually affect that metric, that high level metric, that North Star metric. Then you go and try to fix each metric. You don't even have to do one by one. One by one is more scientifically correct methodology, but we're startups. We're all businesses. We're competing. We can actually do multiple at the same time. Some of them might fail, some of them might be positive, but you will know in the end result if you're good or bad because your North Star metric is your benchmark and you're measuring yourself against yourself. So the important part is be fast, iterate as fast as possible, and the leading metrics will change every time you try to do it. The first time you might need to focus on build times for cycle time. The second time you might need to get rid of a complete team. The third time you might need to do something else. Okay. So you slowly go down. You figure out what the North Star metric you want to improve. Actually, I would say both North Star, speed and quality needs to go together. You select a goal with both of them included in your OKRs or quarterly goals and so on. It's not one. You need to include both of them. Once you have a speed and a quality goal, you dive into where can the problem be? Is the problem the QA team? Is the problem the review process? Is the problem not enough tooling? Is the problem CI? You just figure it out. You go talk to engineers, which ones they seem to have issues with. You track if you can track. Some of them cannot be tracked. Some of them can. You go ahead and then try to figure out where the problem is. If it can be tracked, that's great. You can immediately say the build time is 6 hours. Let's decrease this to 20 minutes, 10 minutes, 5 minutes. That's a really great goal. Okay, there will be like a huge team working on it, but the cycle time will improve drastically. It will take a long time, maybe, but it will improve. So you will identify the problem and iterate one by one. If there is a bottleneck regarding these different leading metrics, I would recommend focus on the bottleneck. So it's better to actually measure all of them consistently. So all leading metrics have some benchmark. Some stuff cannot be measured. For example, development environment. How long does it take for a single engineer to onboard to your system? Does it take 3 weeks because the environment is so complex? Or does it actually take less than a day? That's a thing that is not possible to measure with the current tooling that we have. But you can still do measurements based on surveys or NPSs. All big companies do NPS surveys to their engineers to see the qualitative part of engineering process and have a benchmark. Then they focus on the biggest ones. Solve the biggest one during iteration. Solve the biggest one during iteration. You just continue this flow multiple times. I can ensure that you will have a better North Star metric if you iterate a few times on your goals, based on your goals.
Awesome. So I guess there's, in that process of continuous improvement, there's really a few different steps there, right? You have to be able to, in the first instance, you have to be able to measure the North Stars. Then you're able to drill into these leading indicators. And as you mentioned, there's kind of both qualitative sources of data as well as quantitative. So the quantitative things are nice, we can measure them, we can get a really good insight, but then also on the qualitative side you actually have to go and talk to people, you have to be able to discuss with them as to where things are. You can also use things like NPS surveys, things like this. um, so I was wondering if we could talk about, some of the trends which you tend to see with the leading indicators as to, we know, for example, with test coverage and potentially with build failures, that these things are, low test coverage tends to be bad. Build coverage tends to be, we generally want to get, or build failures we generally want to get down. We want to, cut build times. We want to have good dev environments. Want to have good linting systems. Want to have good code quality. But obviously, there's always a balancing act with these various different factors, and some of these things tend to be issues that companies tend to see more often than others. So I was wondering if you could give us a feel as to what the problems generally tend to be.
Um, Regarding leading metrics, usually people have an assumption, but they think that's the truth. And mostly they think this because they read like from a blog post or from some podcast that they listened, this number needs to be X. That's not necessarily true. Maybe you don't even need to measure that. It completely differs based on what your team is. For example, if you're an iOS team, in Apple Store, you can only do a release. The fastest that you can do a release is 1 week. Your cycle time can never be, at least for the release cycle, the deployment frequency can never be more than a week, less than a week. You need to satisfy that. What does this bring? This brings that your quality needs to be maybe much, much more higher, so that you never have to do a rollback because it's so expensive to do a rollback. App Store has all these processes which blocks you to be fast. But if you're a web developer, you can do like every second. That's totally possible. So it depends on what team you're working on, what technology you're working on, who are you serving. A kernel engineering team is not the same as a front-end engineering team. If you're building space rockets, that's not the same as building apps. So it all depends on what your team needs. Some teams will need really high quality, some teams will need really high speed, and they can actually sacrifice from quality for other reasons. So coming back to leading metrics. Okay, once we have this baseline of my team has a goal, which is we need to make sure the quality is really high because we do iOS apps. How can I focus on where to go? What are the bottlenecks on measuring it? If you go and try to measure, for example, build times is a failed build is a really good example. A lot of teams try to measure the total number of build fails, how long has it been failed, but they track it for all branches. If I'm an engineer, I'm writing a code, I have this branch, I did a git push. It failed because the test didn't pass. Oh, I see that it didn't pass. I fixed the test, push it again. Okay, it passed now. Now I can merge. There was a failure in build there, but why should I track that? That doesn't provide any value to customers. But once you go into trunk branch, if the trunk branch is not building, good luck. The pipeline is completely blocked. Now no engineer can do a release, and if an engineer tries to start on a new task, they will try to git pull. It doesn't work, and they're confused. They're spending so much time on it. You need to track the correct leading metrics. Some of them are common sense. Some of them they're like straightforward. It's just obvious. It depends on what you track. I need to go into one by one all of them. So it's quite a big list. Like it's hundreds. I'll put it that way. There's so many things that we can improve upon. But eventually, what it boils down to is you have assumptions. You start tracking with three leading metrics. You focus on the bottleneck, you fix that, then you look at the other two. I can focus on these, but my gut feeling doesn't say they're correct. Let me track more leading metrics. Then you talk to engineers, you talk to other people in the organization, figure out where they actually have issues. Okay, they have issues with five other things that came up in those conversations. You start tracking them. You have a benchmark. Okay, now the bottleneck is between these eight new leading metrics. It's a different one. You start fixing that one, then iterate again. Then you need more leading metrics. You increase the flow. It's a process like these. the further you go along the company, the number of leading metrics will increase. Some, you will fix it, they will never become a problem again. Some of them, you fix it, 2 years later, you see it, it's again a bottleneck. You'll need to fix it again. It all depends, but slowly start by your gut feeling will basically allow you to track the correct metrics. Then you can figure out which ones are the bottleneck. Then you'll slowly increase this list, and eventually you won't need to have gut feeling because everything is tracked. You have benchmarks on everything, and now you know where to focus on with quite high confidence. And that's where we want to be in. We want to avoid gut feeling, and we want to move that into data-based confidence. And this is the methodology that I would recommend.
Awesome. And I think one of the really key concepts you mentioned there towards the start is really about this idea of balancing risk and reward in many ways. The idea that if you're able to deploy very quickly, if you're able to restore things, and there's very limited risk to things going wrong. I guess the example is, if you're just watched a Netflix movie and the rating systems at the end goes down for 2 minutes, like that's far less of a problem than if deploying an app which is broken, which can take many cycles, or something which is far more mission critical. And I think one of the things that I guess we tend to see is that there's often, some organizations get trapped into this area of vexatious quality where they will focus too heavily on one particular element. So, for instance, you may have company, in a company, they'll focus on potentially, limiting the change failure rate as much as they can to get to 0%, but they do that at the cost of then not being able to deploy quickly enough, not being able to restore things in the future, because they have then, everything is an end-to-end test. Everything will take a lot of time to be able to build and deploy, which ultimately harms them by affecting those metrics. So it seems like there's quite a heavy balancing act at play, and you really need to understand where your priorities are in order to drive that ultimate goal of driving up your revenue, whilst also in certain environments, complying with your regulatory, your ethical risks, and so on, as to how high your risk is. So it seems really fundamental to the engineering process, that balance between risk and reward.
Absolutely. It is. This is actually going into more of a subjective concept because there is no objective truth. There is no process which works for all. Even if you're on even if you're comparing like 10 different organizations and there's like 200 teams in each one of them, they're all in finance sector. Still, you cannot have a playbook which would work for all. You need to figure out what is your company's needs, what's your priorities, what's your mission, what's your values that you care about. You figure out based on these. They might eventually change. In the beginning of the company, when you're a startup, you don't care about too much about quality. You want to figure out what your product market fit is. You want to optimize cycle time as much as possible. You want to optimize deployment frequency. Whereas once you actually hit product market fit, now you have something to lose. Now you have customers. Now they're paying. And if you don't satisfy them, things won't go well. So depending on which sector you are, which type of company, which how long have you been alive? Do you have product market fit or not? All of these are different parameters which will affect you, and you will need to make that decision yourself. There is no playbook which will allow anybody. The only playbook that I can say is the North Star metrics allows your engineering organization to be much more effective. You will need to figure out what the numbers will be for your organization. You'll iterate them, improve upon them. Your values might be updated, such as from a non-product market fit company into a product market fit. You will change these metrics goals, but that is depending on each company. There is no playbook. You need to figure it out. You need to do a lot of discussions with your team, understand what you want to serve to your customers as a value. Coming back to the measurement of quality, the definition of quality, a service that bears its ability to satisfy the customer's needs. So it boils down to there. You need to make sure that your company gives value to your customers, and what works for you, you need to figure that out yourself.